Lena Clark was the nurse everyone mocked. Trembling hands, downcast eyes, the punchline of the night shift at St. Mary's Memorial Hospital. Dr. Vincent Marsh loved humiliating her in front of the entire staff, making her look incompetent and pathetic. But when armed men burst through the ER doors, weapons raised, demanding the execution of a patient under federal protection, all the smiles die. Because that terrified nurse they despised, she's not just a former soldier. She's Major General Lena Valkyrie Clark, U.S. Army. And these invaders just made the worst mistake of their lives by underestimating her. What happens when the weakest person in the room turns out to be the most dangerous? The night had started like any other. Lena was crouched in the hallway, trying to retrieve the medication that had spilled across the floor, trying to pretend she wasn't the subject of every mocking glance. Dr. Marsh's sharp words cut through the sterile air, reminding everyone how much she cost the hospital with her mistakes. Her shoulders hunched, her hands trembled, the perfect image of someone who didn't belong. But as the harsh lights of the ER flickered, something inside her stirred. The whir of helicopter blades cut through the usual hum of the night shift, and her eyes darted toward the window, narrowing as the sound grew louder. Something wasn't right. Her pulse quickened, her instincts kicking in. As the doors swung open and the armed men stormed into the ER, Lena stood frozen, her mind racing. These weren't just any thugs. This wasn't just a robbery. The air shifted, and she knew, without a doubt, that her past had come to find her. The tremor in her hands ceased, replaced by a cold focus as the intruders moved closer. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The men in tactical gear burst through the doors, their heavy boots echoing on the hospital floor. Lena's mind snapped into high alert, every muscle in her body aware of the danger. The lead intruder barked orders, his voice authoritative and cold. "We need the patient, now!" Dr. Marsh stepped forward, trying to assert control, but his polished appearance did nothing against the presence of the armed men. They moved like a well-oiled machine, bypassing the hospital staff as if they were irrelevant. But Lena wasn't irrelevant. Not anymore. She took a step back, blending into the shadows, her mind calculating every move. The air was thick with tension, but she remained still, as if every second was a calculated choice. Then, like a switch had been flipped, her training took over. This wasn't a hospital anymore. This was a battlefield. The intruder's gaze flicked toward her, but she was already 2 steps ahead. The moment the situation escalated, she would act. No hesitation, no mercy. It was what she had been trained for. Lena's body moved before her mind had a chance to catch up. The moment the lead intruder's attention shifted toward Dr. Marsh, she was already on the move. Her hand grabbed a nearby medical supply cart, dragging it behind her as she moved silently down the hallway. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, but the noise of the hospital seemed to fade away. The world had narrowed to a single point of focus, the task ahead. She reached the back door to the ER and quickly locked it. The loud thud of boots coming closer told her they were onto her. She had to act, and she had to do it quickly. The invaders had come for a patient, but Lena knew they weren't just after any patient. They wanted someone important, someone who knew too much, someone who would expose them. But Lena wasn't about to let them succeed. Her past may have been buried, but it was a past built on saving lives, and now it would come to the rescue. She moved through the ER like a shadow, staying out of sight, her mind working through possibilities, each outcome calculated to perfection. She was ready. The moment the intruders breached the ER, Lena's pulse quickened. The hospital's usual hum of activity had been replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. The tension in the air was palpable as the lead contractor barked at Dr. Marsh, demanding the patient's location, but all Lena could focus on was the room filling with armed men, their weapons trained on everyone but her. A part of her wanted to spring into action, but another part, one she had buried for so long, wanted to stay hidden, to stay small. Stay in the background, she reminded herself, her hands curling into fists as her tremors returned, fake, controlled. She took a slow step back, eyes scanning the room. Her mind raced through contingencies. The patient was still alive, still stable for now, but time was running out. As the chaos unfolded, Lena's focus never wavered. She might have been just a nurse in their eyes, but in her heart, she knew who she really was. The years of training, the sacrifices made, were about to come to the surface. She was ready to protect the hospital, ready to protect her patient, no matter what it took. The SEALs had arrived, but the contractors weren't backing down. This would end in a standoff, one way or another. Lena stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the approaching contractors. The moment had arrived. Her cover, her facade of a timid, clumsy nurse, was about to be ripped away, and she knew there was no turning back. The SEALs moved into position with a precision that came from years of training. But the contractors remained unshaken, confident in their numbers. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, the years of hiding, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, now slipping through her fingers. One of the contractors turned, his eyes locking onto hers, a smirk spreading across his face. "What do we have here? The nurse?" he sneered. "What do you think you're going to do, sweetheart?" The others chuckled, but the sound felt hollow to Lena. She didn't respond, letting her silence speak for her. Her body had already started to react, slipping into the movements she had perfected in battle. Her instincts were taking over, her mind focusing only on the task ahead: protect the patient, neutralize the threat. The contractor took another step, his rifle pointing in her direction, but Lena was already moving. Faster than he could react, her hand shot out, grabbing the fire extinguisher from the nearby cart. In one smooth motion, she swung it with the force of a sledgehammer, striking him across the face. His rifle fell to the ground with a deafening clatter. The others froze, stunned. Lena didn't wait for them to recover. She picked up the rifle and spun it around, the weight of it familiar in her hands. "This ends now," she said, her voice cold, steady, every inch of the soldier she had once been rising to the surface. The hospital's ER had become a battlefield. The contractors, now disarmed, scrambled to recover, but Lena was already in control. The rifle in her hands felt like an extension of her body, her movements sharp and deliberate. She scanned the room, assessing the remaining threats, her training kicking in with cold precision. The SEALs, initially stunned by her swift actions, had quickly adapted to the situation. Breaker, their leader, nodded in approval, his gaze intense. He had seen soldiers like her before, fighters who didn't need orders, who just knew what to do. "Move fast, move violent," Lena's mind whispered to her as she turned to face the remaining contractors. They were disoriented, unsure of their next move. But Lena knew there wasn't time for hesitation. She made her way toward them, the sound of the hospital's chaotic stillness ringing in her ears. The contractors were no longer a threat, they were prey. "You've made a mistake," she said, her voice icy. One of the contractors, a younger man, tried to make a break for it, but Lena was already there, her hand quick and sure, the rifle now aimed at him. The air was thick with tension, but Lena remained focused. "Don't run," she ordered, and when he froze, her instincts told her it was time to finish what she started. The contractors were secured, and the room fell silent, the threat neutralized. But Lena's heart was still racing. Her eyes met Breaker's again. There was no going back now. Everyone in the room had seen who she really was, and nothing would be the same. Lena stood over the incapacitated contractors, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Her chest rose and fell with each controlled breath, the sounds of the ER returning to normal, but she knew it wasn't over yet. The SEALs moved swiftly, securing the contractors with military efficiency, and she couldn't help but feel a fleeting sense of familiarity, of belonging. But that feeling was quickly overshadowed by the realization of what had just transpired. The hospital was still recovering from the chaos, the staff still processing the fact that a nurse had just disarmed and neutralized a group of armed men. The shock on their faces, the awe in their eyes, it was all too much. Her cover was shattered. Dr. Marsh stood in the doorway, looking more confused than angry, his earlier fury replaced by uncertainty. "What the hell is going on, Clark?" he demanded. "Who are you?" His voice cracked, the reality of the situation sinking in. Lena met his gaze, but for the first time, she didn't shrink away. "I'm Major General Lena Valkyrie Clark," she said, her voice steady, but the weight of the admission hung heavy in the room. Breaker, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward. "She just saved your lives, Marsh. You owe her an apology." The room was still, the tension palpable as Marsh struggled to comprehend what had just happened. You were supposed to be dead," he whispered, his face pale. "I faked my death," Lena replied softly, her eyes flicking toward the door where the sounds of the Black Hawk's departure still echoed. "But I'm not dead, not anymore." The ER was quieter now, but the silence was thick with questions. The SEALs had escorted the contractors out, their movements sharp, efficient. The tension was slowly fading, but Lena knew it wouldn't be long before the questions started, before the rumors began to spread. She stood at the edge of the room, watching as Dr. Marsh and the other staff members tried to process the chaos. Their glances flickered toward her, a mixture of confusion and awe. She had just saved their lives, but in doing so, she had exposed herself. The fragile identity she had built over the past 8 months was no more. Her past had caught up with her in a single violent moment. Breaker approached her, his presence commanding. "You did good," he said quietly. "But you can't keep hiding." Lena didn't respond. She couldn't. His words echoed in her mind. She had wanted to move on, to live a quiet life, to be just another nurse in a civilian hospital. But that was no longer possible. "It's over," Breaker continued. "You're not invisible anymore. You've been seen." She nodded, her mind racing. She had known this day would come. But that didn't make it easier. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Breaker gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We take care of our own. But first, you need to decide what you're going to do next." The door to the ER opened, and Tom Chen stepped in, his face filled with concern. "Lena," he said, his voice soft, "are you okay?" She looked at him, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She wasn't sure what to say, but for the first time in months, she felt the pull of something more than just survival. She was no longer just the nurse. She was Valkyrie, and no matter what she decided next, she couldn't escape that truth. Lena stood in the middle of the ER, the weight of everything that had just happened settling on her shoulders. The room was buzzing with activity, but she felt detached, as though she were watching the world unfold from a distance. The mask she had worn for so long, the trembling, timid nurse, was gone. In its place stood a woman who had given everything to a life she thought she had left behind. But the question remained, what now? She glanced at the door where Breaker and his team had just left. They had offered her a path back into the world she had tried so hard to leave. But was it really what she wanted? The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Tom approached cautiously, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to explain anything," he said, his voice gentle. "But I'm here, if you need to talk." Lena looked at him, her mind swirling. She had never been good at asking for help, never been able to let anyone close. But tonight, something had shifted. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a moment, she allowed herself to stand there, to just breathe, and let the weight of the moment wash over her. The ER was still in chaos, still recovering from the assault that had nearly torn it apart. But for Lena, the battle had shifted from external enemies to the one within herself. She had been hiding for so long, but she knew now that she couldn't run from who she was anymore. The truth was out, and whatever came next, she would face it head-on, no longer afraid of the past that had shaped her. As she turned to walk out of the ER, her eyes briefly caught her reflection in the glass. The woman in the mirror wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a soldier, a survivor, and for the first time in months, she finally felt like herself again. The future was uncertain, but Lena knew she would no longer be defined by her past. She would define her own path, the end.